Hey, Martin, how are you doing?
Hey, how are you?
Good,
Okay.
good. Thanks for joining.
Okay.
And good. Okay. So Scott,
Yeah, I mean, why don't we get
let me know
started?
when.
I'll keep Skyping with a few people just to make sure they are aware we're having a call. But yeah, I think we have a critical
All
mass
right.
here.
All right. So since the people that we don't have on the call are mostly about IHE, why don't we start with the IHE update? Um, Martin, would you mind telling everybody a little bit what the progress has been there? I'll do a brief introduction so if people don't know what it is, but then you can say kind of where we are with that work.
Okay.
So the IHE work is a label we give to the actual testing of standard profiles that the OHIE group has been putting forth to the IHE committee. And the IHE committee is a body that has many industry players that helps kind of test and stamp use cases around existing standards for exchange of information in healthcare settings. So they're not a full standards body, but they behave like a mini standards body, and they make these profiles, which are really subsets of standards or combinations of standards. And it's a little bit of gray area how they define profile. But anyways, they come up with like well-documented conventions that are based on standards on how to do common use cases. And the facility registry group has been working with OHIE and the provider registry group and others to help inform IHE profiles for exchange of information that includes facilities, but it also has providers and services and whatnot. And we have an up-and-coming Connectathon where different parties will go into the IHE event and basically certify different things working together following those profiles. And Martine is kind of like leading up the technical work for that. The role of the facility registry in that exercise is twofold, and maybe even threefold, but let's start with the two basic ones. So one of them is obviously to expose facility information. The other one is to expose information about what services could be provided at those facilities, like maternal child services, X-rays, and things like that. And then we'll see how far we get in like making the demonstration have many moving parts, but we also might act as a consumer of that service and facility information, kind of like to show how the registries themselves can be updated, acting as consumers of such information exposed in such standards coming from elsewhere. And we'll have somebody from Instead going to the event, and Martine is working with Derek Ritz and the people from IntraHealth to help implement this. And maybe Martine, you want to give us an update?
Yeah. Well, we're basically already implementing the facility directory part of the CSD profile. That's been advancing. I think for next week we'll have at least a version in staging where we can expose a CSD compliant XML. That's for facility directory. For the service directory role, we are still discussing some things with Derek and Carl as well, trying to understand which is the best approach to that, because there seems to be some need to agree on the different kinds of service taxonomies that can be out there, so that one of the main goals in the all this CSD effort is to be able to cross information between about providers, facilities, organizations. So there needs to be some way of kind of agreeing in which are the data dictionaries. So that's basically where we are standing at with the service directory part of it. And well, once we have that endpoint, we are going to work with Carl on adding these endpoints to the info manager he's working on, which is to showcase all this functionality. And we'll take from there. And the dataset we are going to use as an example is from Rwanda, actually.
Well,
that's pretty much.
Thanks, Martine. Cool. And some so that people understand well, they're calling the info manager the specification, the IHE specification that has the link there in the chat. Actually, it's not just an exchange specification, but also it's kind of weird as a profile because it also dictates behavior, and it has a role of a component that sits atop the directories that actually aggregates the information and then provides them in a queryable format. So that one is actually being developed by IntraHealth mostly, and because the CSD profile requires the ability to process X-query queries around the information scheme, therefore you have to, that forces that info manager into having a specific type of database, and or like jump through a lot of hoops. So that's where that is abstracted. Originally we were a bit worried that the X-query language would percolate throughout all the tools as a queries language system, but fortunately in the spec that got encapsulated in the info manager. So
actually, the endpoint demanded is quite simple. It's just let me know about all the changes since a given date. That's all.
Yeah, and this will help inform future revisions of the Fred API, most notably the support of these specific schemas for service directories and facility objects in XML, which is basically the same as the Fred API in JSON, but XMLized, and therefore it will have to have a little schema and so on. So are there any questions about the IHE stuff? No? Okay, great. So just so people visualize the output without having to read all the spec, the IHE will allow a consuming service to do queries such as, tell me all the facilities where that would be open next Tuesday where I can find X-rays, right? Or questions like that, where you cross-cut providers, facilities, and services together. Okay, so if that's it for IHE, is there anything you can show, Martine, or not really right now? It's all just code.
No, not yet.
Okay.
That's in.
So maybe I think the next thing is to look at the, let me think here. Maybe the next thing would be to look at the reconciliation tool from PEPFAR. That was Jorge. You want to give like a 3-minute update on it? Not update, but just like describe what it is, just for Saptarshi's benefit, and then I can do like a quick click-through demo by sharing the screen. Jorge, that's okay? Maybe not. Jorge, are you there? We cannot hear you if you are. Okay, I'll use my Jorge voice and try to explain it until he figures out what's going on with his microphone. Scott, do you mind letting him know that we can? Oh, there he is. No? No. Okay, so one of the things that we've been working with is supporting many groups in the creation of tools and utilities that use facility information but fulfill like more vertical or focused use cases, something that it's not necessarily appropriate as a design direction to embed into a facility registry system or their ResourceMap tool. So that includes tools that do either, oh, I guess his connection was getting cut off, or I totally screwed up the introduction. That includes tools that implement very country-specific workflows, and that also includes things that implement. Let's see, Jorge, are you there now?
Yes. Hello.
Perfect. Hello.
Okay, great.
So I was just like waving my hands a bit, like waiting for you to come. So I was just saying that we're building these, not building, but also helping other people to build these utilities that sit on top of the facility registry and allow specific workflows, use cases, and needs to be met without having to change the core service or product. And it's actually, it's really a strategy that is materializing the original vision of let's have a registry that does that well, and let's have then an ecosystem of applications that can consume and contribute data around it. And some of these use cases are very useful generically, but also you wouldn't necessarily want to have them embedded into the core tool. So why don't you describe a little bit about the purpose of the reconciliation tool, and I'll just show it in a screen share for a second. And,
Sure.
And then we can explain some of the technical things that's been happening to enable that sort of stuff to be easier.
Okay, so thank you, Ed. So we're building with your team a reconciliation tool, and the purpose being that we all, I think, recognize the benefit of having a master facility within the country. The problem is that there's actually multiple sources of facility information. We have several partners in country, and they probably track their own facilities to knowing what it is that they do, where they're doing it, who's doing it. The issue is bringing all these facility lists together and then reconciling between them so that we can come up with one master facility list that everyone agrees and can point to and say, yes, we have this ID, we can share information, and now we can correlate information between different systems based on this common facility ID. One of the issues really is getting, wherein they might have different systems. It might vary all the way from being an Excel sheet or some kind of CSV type format file to access at the desktop level to maybe for the more mature users, something like ResourceMap or DHIS2 or any number of other systems. And being able to look at all these different systems and then be able to say, yes, my facility here, Mary's, is the same as your St. Mary's. Having spoken with people in the field, whenever they had to go through this exercise, it's a painful process of looking at various different Excel sheets or trying to import it into some kind of relational database and then trying to eyeball between the systems where there might be agreement. So the point of this reconciliation tool was to be able to ingest from these different sources and facilitate the reconciliation process so that they could get to the point where they do have a master facility list. So that's basically the crux of this utility, and we hope that we'll be able to socialize this to our teams in the PEPFAR countries and eventually to our partners there, and be able to get our partners to be able to upload their facility data into this utility and then working together to reconcile between their various lists. And then ideally hand that over. That just gets to the point where we agree on facility lists. At that point, then it would be moved into ideally a registry, and the whole updating and curating process would be taken care of at that point within the registry tool. But this tool lets us move from the current state of a whole bunch of heterogeneous data sources that have facility information to the one homogeneous system. I'm sorry, Ed, are you on mute?
Yes. No? No? Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So, so I'm just giving a quick walkthrough of basically you define what sort of a schema you want to converge into, and then from the multiple data sources you can start doing the mapping and the and let's say here, let's go into the not classified. And you can start, actually, here you are. So you could say, for example, here are all the different sort of hierarchies that you might have, or the categories around them, and here's the number of records within each one. And basically there's these things about reconciling not just the data, but also the metadata, so that you actually have a similar district list, for example. So I really don't want. I want to do a full demo, but I want to explain a couple of things that we were doing to make these sort of applications easier to do, and then maybe Martine can go into the details. So one of the things that you'll notice is if you log out of this is a staging site for this application, right? So this is all in pretend space still, but let me see. If you read here, it says that you should use your ResourceMap account, right, to log into this application. And this is, I would not create a user for the reconciliation tool. Rather, I would just use a user account of the, that I use in that ResourceMap instance. And one of the important aspects of that is that, we've basically refactored ResourceMap to use a standards-based authentication authority based on OpenID and OAuth to be able to allow external applications use ResourceMap as a login. Actually, there's a third-party component, so now there's an external component. It looks like it's part of ResourceMap, but it's really not, right? That is that authentication authority and password, kind of checker and all that stuff, and it's all using standards like OpenID. But it allows us to have like the third-party applications not have to manage a different set of users, permissions, and things like that. So it makes it really easy. For example, if you add a user and you give them the right permission into ResourceMap, then automatically they inherit those permissions in these other utilities and tools. Obviously, the tool on top can be more restrictive than the permissions that you get within ResourceMap, but it doesn't, but it cannot be more expansive. When we also have a system where we can mark some applications as trusted because we know like how they're written and so on, that allows them to have like a sort of service account access. So for example, if this tool allowed you to do crazy kung fu on the schemas and it's very constrained, but it's trusted in what they're doing and they wouldn't allow them to go into collections they don't have access to, then we could mark this application as trusted, and then the specific users wouldn't need to have those permissions, but still be able to do things within that permission sandbox. So this hasn't been an important change to ResourceMap. I mean, it's not a visible change. The behavior is still all the same, but it makes it easier for third-party applications to be built on top, reusing all the accounts and all their permissions. This is also used by the Tanzanian curation tool, which had some requirements for here. I would like them to come on this call and show what they're doing. But basically, this is a tool that allows them to approve facility edits, request facility edits, kick upwards in the hierarchy of authority, kind of like that something has been edited and so that it gets approved, kind of like that workflow. And it would have been crazy to try to implement all those flavors of workflows inside a tool like ResourceMap. So this is another perfect example of a very vertical, specific set of requirements being implemented in an external tool. And obviously here, in these sort of curation processes and approval processes, the whole permission set that you have, what facilities you can access and how you can edit them is very important. So this is also another tool that is using this new OpenID and OAuth infrastructure to consume the information. Martine, is there anything you wanted to share about that?
No, I think it's a very complete outline of everything. And just one thing that's nice about this new component is that it will allow us to encapsulate a lot of knowledge about how to deal with authorization and all the security around that every application that uses eventually comes to use this component will benefit from that same experience. So I mean, as much as there are other backend components in the Instead platform, like for example Nuntium, that lets you handle message issues. This one is going to become a place where we concentrate all our knowledge about dealing with authorization and authentication.
Yeah, and we're working with the OHIE group to actually make this a component of OHIE, so that whenever you're authenticating against any registry, or whenever you're authenticating against, whenever like any systems can be built around this, all of them are using the same standards for the authentication and authorization and so on. And that's going to be nice, because until now there was an issue was like, well, who does the check? And part of the thinking was like the HIM, this health interoperability mediator, was going to be doing the authorization checks for everything, but that doesn't really scale, not technically but organizationally, right? And this allows you to have a federated system of services, all of them having the same enforcement and checks around the same credential set, but and so you don't sacrifice security, but you do get more of a federated environment where each system can act independently, but within the same governance.
And it also becomes easier to share the user base, so you don't put all that. All the complexities of dealing with different organization systems on the user, because he doesn't need to make 1,000 different accounts to work with. So.
Yep. Okay. And right now, this doesn't change the way the Fred API works or anything like that, but it does make it much more easier to make systems that can authenticate against it with the right credentials and so on, and not have that be duplicated everywhere. Okay. I don't know, Jorge or Saktashi, if you have any questions about that, but I think it's pretty straightforward. And we're using OpenID and OAuth, which are pretty standards to deal with this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Jorge?
No, I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay. Oh, okay. No, I saw your image pop up, so I thought. Okay, so this is that, and let me think what else. We have the applications. There's also another changes that we've been doing to the way the API of the facility registry can expose field metadata, and because all of these, both the curation. Actually, Martine, do you want to talk a little bit about how the reconciliation tool has added different features into the history tracking of facilities and into the metadata fields and like the extensible metadata and things like that?
Some of them I'm not aware of, because
okay.
But yeah, there are a couple of nice things. One of them is we simplified the way to work with field metadata of collections. Before doing this, usually you would have to update all the schema at once through a very complicated request, and risky because it was quite error prone. So we enabled some endpoints that will let you create or update metadata a field at a time. Other interesting things we added are, for example, counting endpoints, so that you can get information such as, for example, how many facilities are there with a given value for a given field, which lets you, just on top of that, build a number of reports or charts or stats. I don't know if there's an example we can.
Yeah, I'm showing in the MFA in the reconciliation tool how you can just do the counts and the percentages basically using that. Yeah, this is an example.
Yeah, that's one of the examples of it. So it was a really simple addition, but it's proving very useful. And since we are since it's a very focused API, to that matter, we have been able to optimize it internally in the implementation, so that it's quite a cheap query to the ResourceMap API.
Mm-hmm.
those are the basic things I'm aware of, but I know that there have been some improvements in the history, but in the management history, but I haven't been on top of that. So and the guy who's been leading that is unfortunately absent today. So
no worries. And another thing I wanted to show is that now the metadata for a field is user extensible as well. So remember, Jorge, we were saying some weeks ago, hey, it would be great to store, for example, that this field is actually this kind of code in this ontology, right?
Right.
And being able to store that. So you have already seen this, but I don't know if Saptarshi has. So this now allows you to set it, and this is also obviously available via the API and stuff.
Yeah, I just remember a new feature, but which is already in staging, I think. Although we may iterate on it in the future, which is that from the import wizard you can now use a pivot field, which means that if you have an external identifier in your collection, for example, I know in the case of Tanzania, they are working with Loon IDs or FOSA IDs in the case of Rwanda. I don't know if everyone knows the semantics of those fields. But basically, identifiers that make sense in other systems than ResourceMap. You can use those as a fixed point for the import wizard to update sites or facilities, and that makes it a lot easier to import data because you can just say, hey, this column in this Excel file I have is what the way I identify this the facilities. So if you find a row here which belongs to which has an ID that belongs to an already existing facility in the system, instead of creating a new one, just update the existing one with this new data. So before this,
so I had, sorry, I had a question on that point. So the key value, do you also have any validation on it, or can you just add anything you want?
Yeah, you mean the metadata that I mentioned before?
Yeah.
No, it's free. You just define whatever key you want and whatever value you want.
Yeah, this is actually the whole point of it is being very open. So for example, here you could have like an ICD 10 and it's like A, right? Or you could have something like right, and graphical issues as a
yeah, something really similar to this concept is what you can find in the identifier fields. Ed, if you want to click there. In this case, they are built into the field type. So we have agency and context. But if you want to mimic that in another field, you would put two metadata items. One which says agency for the key. Sorry. Another that would say whatever agency you want for the value to be, and then another key value which is context and the given value. So for example, you could you could create an external ID, but not in the built-in way, but saying, okay, this field will correspond to the ID that the Ministry of Health gives to this facility in their full system. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And
my only problem, my only question with that was, without a validation rule, do you know the data that's being put in? Is that common across all the fields?
So that is an infrastructure piece that is common across all the fields, but it's not exposed in the UI across all of them yet. So So yeah, and again, I mean, other than like some basic, you cannot put your whole, you cannot put like a whole 2 megabyte XML document, I think, in there or something like that. There's not much validation, kind of like purposefully, and because you could actually, Martine, correct me if I'm wrong, but some consuming application might actually enjoy having a small JSON, kind of array in there, for example, and use it to track its own application-specific things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and this is something that you just define once per field, and that only collection administrators can set up, or third-party applications. So it's not that free. I mean, it's not something that any random user will play with in general. So
yeah. Yeah. But again, we're finding patterns that make it simpler for third-party systems to use the registry as a source of truth and really make their applications more like shells that can live on the data model, instead of like having to replicate all the data just because they want to save one extra bit, right? And then have to write all the indexes, and because they have a copy of the data, now they have to think about two-way sync and so on. These things make it easier, other than for the real cases where they need to do that, to just use the existing model as a source of truth and operate on it real time. And there'll still be scenarios where you want to have a copy of the information in cached in another system, but reducing that to the most, the least amount of possible cases is something that simplifies life for everybody, and adds to the integrity of the data, right? Because then it reduces the chances for people to make applications that didn't need to copy the data, but maybe they are helping people do updates, and then those updates are living elsewhere, and then versioning and sync is an issue. So in the end, the goal is to help it make applications that can treat this as a live master source of truth and keep it that way.
Yeah, one of the things we've been discussing about, although we still haven't planned an actual implementation, is to let applications have kind of exclusive fields. I mean, fields that they know that exist, and that they exclusively can read and write for each facility, which would let ResourceMap become a kind of repository for their own the own application data, without them needing to come up with a data repository of their own.
Right. So without making it without corrupting the user experience around it. So here's like an example of fields that are kept by the external app in a specific layer, right, inside the tool. So the user should only care about this one, and this should be visible to administrators but hidden from the normal layer list.
Yeah. So right now that's a convention.
Yep, exactly.
But we may factor it out into something more built-in and easier to, less error-prone, actually.
Yep. Okay, so I think that's that. And then I think one of the final things that were worth sharing is that part of the OHIE group, we're putting together some guidelines. There's different topologies where these facility registries could be used. Sometimes you have this whole...
Sorry, go ahead. To interrupt you. I have some guys here wanting to install new fiber optics. Murphy has a way of putting all events together. So I need to do...
Go do that and get new fiber optics. I'm sure you need them. All right. Bye. So he's getting new fiber optics, and I can barely get an internet connection at my home right now. I'm envious. So the final thing I wanted to share is that we're working on like a technical guide to help people who are working in different environments and topologies of how to use these registries when they're being directly accessed from other applications versus when they're like hidden between like an enterprise service bus or an HIM of sorts. And we're going to be working with the OHIE community to put those guidelines together to explain how, in whether it's in the hidden exclusive mode or whether it's in a more shared mode, these registries can still comply with the requirements around authentication, authorization, and so on. And that's like a technical mini guide that will come out over time, but it would be great, to kind of link it from the implementation guide that we have for the facility registry at large. And which is this one, which I'm sure all of you have seen. So yeah, I'm out of updates with all that stuff. One of the things that has been challenging is that because of the external timelines driven by Tanzania's implementations, the implementations elsewhere, the PEPFAR timelines and the likes, we've been really heads down trying to work with the users and meet their requirements, and we haven't had much time to kind of maybe bring up every small kind of design decision to meet those requirements through this group. So one of the things that we'll be doing is, as soon as we get a breather, probably this will be after the end of the year, come back and say, look, here's a list of things we learned, and if we need to refactor them and make it broader, to how do we design them, we can do that. But also having a working example is sometimes the best way to get to that faster approach, right? Because you can say, look, we have a working example and we find no issues with it, or hey, we have a working examples and we know exactly what are the issues that we have with it, but it is what we have, so let's design something better together. So so that's pretty much I think that what will be happening over the rest of the year. Scott, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I think that was a great kind of summary of the technical stuff that's going on. Yeah, I think I'd be curious to hear if Saptarshi, you have any questions after kind of seeing the various aspects of updates or things that you are particularly interested in kind of the open issues for the FRED API as well.
Not really. I was interested in the GitHub issues, but I just wanted to see this, and this is great. I think this is good, and I like the idea of not having to discuss this and then putting forth what's been learned. I think that's a good approach.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think once we're able to do that, then we can start to kind of try to close out some of those GitHub issues and get consensus among all the various community members. Because some weeks we have representation from all the different groups, and I think then we can make a better push towards okay, this is going to be the direction that FRED goes to represent the facility registry community on a whole. Jorge, any questions from you before we wrap up, or?
No, not right now. Though I'd love to see the. I loved seeing Ed's example of that field and being able to put in the ICD-9 and then say that that's equivalent to this other code, because I think that's going to add some harmony between systems. That's pretty cool. I'm glad to have seen that today. So, but as far as questions, no, I don't have any questions.
No, great, thanks. Well, Ed or Martin, anything else to close us out, or should we wrap up for today?
I'm ready to wrap up, and I'm just looking at the code check-ins if there's anything I forgot.
What are you looking for?
No, I'm looking for things that we might have not talked about that were relevant.
Okay.
So yeah, this is single sign-on, and then this, and then yeah. No, I think I'm done.
Okay, great. Well, why don't we wrap up for today then? And yeah, thanks everybody for joining, and yeah, and we'll see you guys in another couple weeks.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Cheers, Scott.
See you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Jorge. Thanks.